From the first film giving fans a breath of fresh air, to the massive disappointment of the second film's box office performance, the Shazam franchise, and indeed superhero films in general, seem like they're in dire straits. So what's going on here?
Kind of missed that too.
Yeah, right, don't lie.
Holy
Wait, what is this? Oh my god, you guys!
Well, Shazam's box office returns are bad enough to call it a flop. That's a big problem for Warner Brothers, because they were banking on Shazam. After all, the first movie was one of the few decent offerings from the DCEU, and the studio was hoping that they could ride the high for a lot longer. Unfortunately, the receipts are in, and Shazam's doing pretty terrible as far as the box office is concerned. Sure, it's managed to gross over $100 million, but that's just the bare minimum from the way things are looking. Especially with the dramatic drop in ticket sales in the days following its release, it's pretty doubtful that Shazam will clear the $200 million mark. But wait, how's this even possible? Wasn't the first film an enormous success? While that's true, the sequel had a lot going against it. It's being released amid a relaunch of the entire cinematic universe. We all have James Gunn to thank for this. After getting the top job at the DCU, Gunn's been busy trying to change everything, planning a reboot that will make all of the previous characters and stories obsolete. Retconning a superhero universe isn't a new concept by any means. DC's done it plenty of times in the comics. In fact, Crisis on Infinite Earths was one of the biggest comic book events of all time, and the whole premise behind that storyline was restarting the universe from scratch. So Gunn's not exactly doing something unprecedented here. Instead, he's just bringing a tried and tested comic book trope to the big screen for the first time. We'll have to wait and see how this pans out for the wider universe. But in the meantime, Shazam: Fury of the Gods has definitely suffered a blow, because fans are confused about a lot of things. Firstly, does Shazam even have a place in this brave new world? If not, what even is the point of going to the cinema to watch this movie? That alone explains why the box office returns are nowhere close to what studio execs were predicting. But it's also just the tip of the iceberg. The marketing of the film left a lot to be desired. For one thing, the trailers might have revealed way too much about the movie's plotline. Like, I get it. The filmmakers wanted to reveal a few details to drum up excitement for the release. But come on, they basically showed us the Cliff Notes version of the entire movie. I mean, even the Wonder Woman cameo was spoiled in one of the final trailers. That's the kind of thing that would have created a lot of buzz. But instead of letting the fans discover it on their own, creating some huge word-of-mouth marketing in the process, the marketing team behind the film decided to tell us before the movie even came out. That was obviously going to make fans less willing to pay for a ticket. Because you've got to understand, superhero films aren't drawing the same kind of crowds as they used to. Shazam 2 is the latest in a long line of subpar superhero movies, whether you're talking about the Eternals or the disastrous Morbius, which was so bad it became a meme. You have to admit that superhero films are having a bit of a bad run. The MCU's been struggling to make anything decent of late. The Eternals was bad enough, but the fourth Thor movie, along with Ant-Man Quantumania, both seriously missed the mark. So fans aren't going to be willing to go see a superhero film just for the sake of it anymore. Instead, they'd want some indication that it'll be worth their while. And unfortunately, for Shazam 2, the marketing campaign didn't give fans anything worth cheering for. To top it all off, Shazam's companion film, Black Adam, is arguably one of the worst superhero movies in recent memory, and filmmakers didn't even get a chance to tie the two films together. To be fair, Dwayne Johnson apparently had a diva moment, and he shot down any attempts to feature Zachary Levi in his own film. Nor was he willing to show up in Shazam 2 either. Now, this might not have been a big deal if the film was actually good, but if you've seen the film, you'll know it's not exactly high quality. Critics are tearing the film apart, and for good reason, cause Shazam! Fury of the Gods just isn't anywhere close to the original in terms of quality. Sure, Zachary Levi gets some zingers in here or there, but there's not much else he brings to the table. What's more, the kid version of Billy Batson is nowhere to be seen, so the franchise went from wish fulfillment for its target audience to being just another movie that shows superheroes blowing stuff up.
Okay, clearly we gotta give you a lightning-themed superhero name.
Things might have been different if this was a movie featuring Superman or Batman. Those characters have legions of fans who turn up regardless of whether or not the movie was good. But Shazam? He's more of a C-lister, so he just doesn't have the same kind of draw as his more famous counterparts. I kinda feel for Levi, cause he had his heart set on this project. He's gone on the record to defend the film. Some are saying that he's just making excuses, but even so, his criticism of the marketing campaign is well warranted. The ad campaign barely even mentioned the fact that this was a family film. Perhaps less justifiably, Levi's tried to blame the feud with Dwayne Johnson for the film's failure. Now, I'll admit that some crossover with Black Adam would have done the film good, but given that film's own disastrous box office performance, distancing itself from that failure would have only been a good thing for Shazam 2. To his credit, Levi's continued to defend the film, and he's urged fans to go to Rotten Tomatoes and talk about how much they loved it. In all honesty, there is a bit of a disparity between critics' scores and the audience scores on the site. While just 51% of critics gave it a positive review, the movie got an audience score of 87%. That kind of shows that fans are still loving this movie. But despite all that, they're just not showing up in theaters. So this really doesn't matter either way. There's also another potential factor at play here, and it's one that superhero movie studios have been dreading for ages. Could superhero fatigue finally be here? I'm actually a little skeptical about this one, cause people have been crying superhero fatigue since 2006 when Spider-Man and X-Men films dominated the box office. And do you know what happened a couple of years later? Iron Man was released, and the entire MCU was born in his wake. So all of these superhero fatigue claims just sound like the same old fear-mongering. But could things be different this time around? Like, there's clearly a pattern here. It's not just DCU that's struggling. The MCU, which has regularly put out movies that raked in billions at the box office, has also had a terrible run. But we should also remember that the movies that failed at the box office were also kind of poorly made overall. But if the studios started focusing on quality instead of quantity, the superhero genre could get a second win. Until then, the failure of Shazam and other films like it just doesn't bode well for the future of the genre. There you have it. That's all from me on why Shazam 2 was a flop.